My family has a tradition. The eldest daughter doesn't go to college. She stays home, takes care of the house, marries young, has babies. Grandma did it, mom did it. When I got accepted to MIT, mom tore the letter in half. This is not who we are. I taped it back together, left at 5 a.m. the next morning, and didn't come back. 7 years later, the tradition had a shape before it had a name. It looked like my grandmother's hands at the kitchen counter on Sunday mornings, rolling pierogi dough with the heel of her palm. Not a recipe in sight, because the recipe lived in her hands, not on paper. It looked like my mother standing beside her, learning the pressure, the thickness, the moment to stop. It looked like the oak recipe box on the counter with Davis carved across the lid. 3 generations of index cards inside, each one in a different woman's handwriting, like a relay baton passed between people who had no idea they were running a race they hadn't agreed to enter. I grew up in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. Brick row houses on Mahantongo Street, 2 bedrooms upstairs, kitchen at the back, a front room where my grandmother watched television with the volume turned all the way down. My father worked at a tool and die shop 6 minutes by car. My mother stayed home. My sister Maddie was 4 years younger than me, and from the moment she was born, I understood without being told that I was the eldest daughter and she was not, and that this distinction meant something in our house even if no one said the word tradition out loud. The word they used was family, as in, this is how our family does things, as in, you'll understand when you're older, as in, your grandmother did it, your aunt did it, I did it, and there is a specific kind of love embedded in the repetition that you are not yet equipped to see. I was equipped to see it by the time I was 12. My Aunt Carol lived 8 blocks away. She had married Donnie Shemansky in 1988, 2 years out of high school, 3 kids before she was 25. Every Sunday, she sat at our kitchen table and talked about the kids and Donnie's back and the price of ground beef at the Shop and Save on Route 61. She was not unhappy exactly, but she was not anything else either. There was no second gear. My mother was the same way. Up at 6. Breakfast on the table by 7. My dad out the door. Maddie and I to school. Then the house. Always the house. The floors, the laundry, the grocery run. Dinner by 6. Dishes by 7. Television at 8. Bed by 10. And the next day the same. I did not know what my mother had wanted before she became this version of herself. She seemed to be exactly and completely herself. A woman who kept a clean house and raised 2 daughters, and that was the whole of it. I was wrong about that, but I did not find out until I was 25. What I knew at 12 was this. I did not want the gear my mother was in. I wanted different gears. I wanted, more than anything I had ever wanted, to find out how many there were. I did not say this out loud. I was not stupid. I was a 12-year-old girl in a brick row house on Mahantongo Street in Pottsville, Pennsylvania, with a grandmother in the front room and a mother in the kitchen, and a tradition so old it did not even know it was a tradition anymore. It had calcified into fact. The kind of fact you do not argue with, because arguing with it feels like arguing with gravity. You don't debate gravity. You just figure out how to move inside it without being crushed. I figured out how to move inside it by going to the school library. 2nd floor, west window. The table behind the encyclopedias. Nobody sat there. The librarian, Mrs. Hoban, was a small woman with bifocals and orthopedic shoes who left me alone as long as I did not eat in the stacks. I did not eat in the stacks. I sat at that table from 8th grade through 12th, and I read everything I could find that pointed somewhere other than Mahantongo Street, and I took notes in the margins of a composition notebook I kept at the bottom of my backpack under my gym clothes where nobody looked. I took the SAT the first time in October of my junior year. I told my mother I was working a Saturday shift at the Patel Family Bakery 2 blocks over, which I did 3 Saturdays out of 4 for $10 cash. The 4th Saturday, I was on a Greyhound to Philadelphia for a free test prep session I had found on the library bulletin board. I scored 1420 the first time. I took it again in March and scored 1560. I told no one. I took the ACT in November. 35. I told no one. The applications went in during December of senior year. 7 of them. I used the school library computer, paid the fees with cash saved from babysitting, and listed the school's address as my mailing address with a note to Mrs. Hoban that I was expecting college correspondence. She never asked why I wasn't using my home address. Mrs. Hoban was the kind of woman who understood more than she said. 6 applications were to schools I could not afford, submitted on principle. The 7th was to MIT. I had read about the need-based scholarship program in a donated college guide, full tuition, room and board for students who qualified. I read that page 4 times before I believed it was real. I qualified. The thick envelope arrived on a Thursday in March. Mrs. Hoban handed it to me at 7:52 in the morning with both hands, the way you hand someone something that requires steadiness. I took it to the table behind the encyclopedias. I sat down. I opened it. The letter was 3 pages. The first line said congratulations. The second line said full need-based scholarship. The third line said housing and meal plan included. I read the first sentence 11 times. I cried without sound for approximately 14 minutes, which I know because I watched the clock on the wall above the reference desk. Then I folded the letter in thirds, put it inside the cover of my chemistry textbook, and went to first period. My plan at that point was still no. The plan had always been no. Apply on principle in secret, and if a yes ever arrived, which I had not genuinely believed it would, decline it, and keep the decline in the same place I kept the test scores, which was nowhere that anyone in my house would find it. The plan had been to know, just to know that I could have. The plan had not anticipated full need-based. The plan had not anticipated room and board included. The plan had not anticipated that the practical obstacle, money, would be removed entirely. I had 36 hours before the second envelope, the one with the housing forms and the parent affidavit, would arrive at the school address. I spent those hours trying to make a new plan. I did not make one fast enough. My mother found the letter on a Friday afternoon. I had moved it from the chemistry textbook to under the bath mat in the upstairs bathroom, which was the most private place I knew of in a house with no locks on the interior doors. I had meant to retrieve it that night after everyone was asleep and transfer it to a more permanent hiding spot. I had not moved fast enough. My mother did the bath mat when she cleaned the bathroom on Friday afternoons. I had forgotten. I came through the back door from school at 3:15. My mother was at the dining table folding laundry, white towels in one stack, dish rags in another, my father's work coveralls in a third. The letter was on the table next to the dish rags. She did not look up when I came in. She kept folding. She said, "Bathroom trash is private, Teresa." I stood in the doorway with my backpack on. I had not thrown the letter away. She had found it under the bath mat, which meant she had read it, which meant she knew about MIT and the scholarship and the test scores and all of it. 7 months of careful silence, gone in one Friday afternoon cleaning. I started to explain. Full scholarship, no debt. 4 years of room and board. I had the math ready in my head. The logic of it, the absence of cost, the presence of opportunity. My mother picked up the letter. She looked at me. Then she tore it down the middle, slowly, all 3 pages at once. Then she turned the halves and tore them again. The 4 rectangles fell on the dining table. The red MIT logo cut cleanly in half. "This is not who we are." She said it quietly. That was the part I had not prepared for. I had prepared for shouting. I had practiced arguments against shouting. I had not practiced anything against that particular quiet. My grandmother did not look away from her television in the front room. My sister Maddie, who was 14 and had been on the bottom stair without either of us noticing, held the banister with both hands. My father, in the garage 2 rooms away, did not hear a thing. The whole tearing took maybe 7 seconds. By 7:30 that evening, Aunt Carol was at our kitchen table. My mother had called her at 5:18, 6 minutes after the tearing, the receiver still warm. My grandmother had wheeled her armchair into the dining room. The 4 pieces of the letter were still on the table. The applesauce cake my mother had baked on Wednesday sat next to them, untouched. Nobody had moved anything. My father was in the garage with a sandwich. They talked for 2 hours. My grandmother said the eldest daughter stays. She said it 3 times, which was how many times she said things she considered settled. Aunt Carol said she had stayed. My mother had stayed. This was not a burden, it was a gift. The family needed me home. Maddie needed a sister nearby. My mother said I had been taking tests in secret, applying to schools without her knowledge, using the school's address to hide mail from her. She said it the way you say the thing that is supposed to end the conversation. I said, MIT offered me a full ride. My grandmother adjusted her glasses and said, then they wasted a letter. I stopped arguing at 8:15, not because they had convinced me, because I had understood, sitting at that table with the torn letter in front of me, that the argument was not happening in real time. The argument had happened before I was born. The conclusion had been reached before I drew my first breath. What was happening at the dining table on Friday evening was not a debate. It was a recitation. They were reading back to me the decision that had already been made about my life, and they expected me to receive it the way you receive something that has always been yours to carry. I went upstairs at 10 o'clock. I did not sleep. I waited. At 1:40 in the morning, when the house was quiet enough that I could hear the refrigerator hum from the kitchen, I went downstairs. The 4 pieces of the letter were still on the dining table. My mother had not thrown them out. She had left them as a lesson, or a warning, or both. I gathered them. I took them to the upstairs bathroom and locked the door behind me, which accomplished nothing since there was no lock, but the act of closing the latch gave me something to push against. I sat on the tile floor with my back against the tub. The Scotch tape was in the medicine cabinet. My mother kept it there for the labels on her prescription bottles. I pulled a strip slow so it didn't make noise. I taped each tear like a stitch. My mother had taught me to mend things: hems, buttons, the spine of a paperback. She had not specified which things were worth mending and which were not. She had just taught me the motion. Lay it flat, hold the edges together, apply pressure until it holds. The scholarship sentence ran across 2 tape lines when I was done. I could still read it. I folded the letter into thirds. I put it in the inside chest pocket of my denim jacket. I went back to my room. I opened the bottom drawer of the dresser. $340 in cash, saved from 2 years of babysitting. A printed Greyhound schedule I had downloaded at the library in October and folded into ACE. Boston route, 5:22 a.m. departure from Pottsville. I wrote a note for Maddie on half a page torn from my composition notebook. I told her I loved her. I told her I would write. I told her not to be afraid. I slipped it under her pillow at 1:40 while she slept with her mouth open and her arm hanging off the edge of the mattress the way she had slept since she was 3 years old. I went down the stairs in socks. The light in the garage was on. I had expected it to be off. My father was at his workbench, sleeves rolled, hands greasy. The carburetor from a 1992 Buick that had not run in 2 years, open on a clean rag. He was not fixing it. He was pretending to. He had been waiting. I stood in the doorway with my coat on and my duffel bag at my feet. He turned. He looked at me the way he looked at customers who came into the shop with a problem they couldn't name. He nodded once. Your mother loves you, Teresa. I know. He wiped his hands on the rag. He went into his back pocket and took out his wallet. He counted out 4 $20 bills and held them out. I took them. For the bus, he said. I put the bills inside my jacket with the letter. He did not ask where I was going. He did not need me to tell him. He had heard the phone call to Carol. He had heard the tearing through the wall. He had been awake the same way I had been awake, lying in the dark doing the math of it, and he had made his decision somewhere between dinner and 1 in the morning. I did not say thank you. I did not say goodbye. He turned back to the carburetor. I picked up my duffel and walked out the side door of the garage into the alley. It was 4:11 in the morning. The temperature was 31 degrees. I could see my breath. The Greyhound station was 1.4 miles from my house. I walked it in 24 minutes with a navy duffel on my shoulder and a taped letter against my collarbone and $420 in my jacket. jacket. That was everything. That was enough. South Station smelled like diesel and pretzel salt. I walked from South Station to MIT Student Services with my duffel on my back. 5 miles. I had paper directions printed at the Pottsville Library 2 weeks earlier, folded into my back pocket with the crease going soft. I arrived at the office of First Generation Student Programs at 9:30 on a Friday night in March. The office was closed. I sat on the floor outside the door until a security guard moved me along at 10:15. I slept in a study lounge in the basement on a vinyl couch the color of wet sand. 4 hours, my duffel as a pillow. On Monday morning at 8 o'clock, a woman named Dr. Marina Ortiz opened her office door and said, "You're early." I said, "I came early." She said, "How early?" I said, 3 days. I had not eaten a real meal since a hot dog at the Hartford Greyhound station. Dr. Ortiz took one look at me and walked me down the hall to the cafeteria and used her faculty meal pass to buy me eggs and toast and orange juice. She watched me eat without saying anything. When I was finished, she said, "Tell me what you have." I had the taped letter. I had $316. I had a duffel with a broken strap. I had no signed parent affidavit and no proof of income because my parents would not provide either. Dr. Ortiz held the taped letter for a long time. She turned it over and turned it back. She said, "Keep that." I started to put it in my jacket. She stopped me. "Frame it. Cheap," she said, "but keep it where you can see it." The first year passed the way years pass when you are working hard enough that time stops feeling like something that happens to you and starts feeling like something you are making. I took 18 credit hours each semester plus a summer session. I worked 20 hours a week in the materials science lab and another 12 at the dining hall. My GPA at the end of freshman year was 3.76. I went to 3.89 sophomore year. I emailed my mother twice. The first email was in the second week of school, my new address and the dorm phone number. The second was after fall finals, a short paragraph that ended with, "I miss you." Neither got a reply. I stopped emailing after the second one. In October of sophomore year, at 11 at night, I checked my email before bed and found a message from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was, "Mom." The body was 3 sentences. "She told the church you're dead." The priest asked at coffee hour. Aunt Carol confirmed. People believe it. It was signed Maddie. I read it 4 times. My mother had buried me. Not metaphorically. She had told the parishioners of our church that I had passed away. My Aunt Carol had corroborated. The priest had asked at the coffee hour after the 11 o'clock mass, and my mother had confirmed it, and the whole congregation had absorbed it as fact and begun treating her with the particular soft grief you extend to a woman who has lost a child. The dead daughter narrative was easier than the alive daughter who had refused to stay. I did not reply to Maddie that night. I did not know what to say. I closed the laptop and went to bed and lay in the dark for a long time thinking about a version of myself that existed in Pottsville as a grave. I wondered if there was a stone. I decided there probably wasn't. A stone would require a specific lie my mother wasn't ready to commit to. What she had was the vague tragedy of it, the way people nod and lower their voices and do not ask questions, and that was probably enough. I got up and made tea and went back to bed and slept 4 hours. Junior year, March. The payphone in the lobby of the student center rang for me on a Tuesday afternoon at 4:11. My dad. Grandma had a stroke. Mild. She was home. She was asking for me. I stood with the receiver against my ear. "When did it happen?" I asked. 3 weeks ago. I let the silence sit. He sat in it. I said, "She had 3 weeks of asking, and you waited until now to call?" He did not answer. I said, "Tell her I'm in finals. I'm sorry." And I hung up. Finals were 6 weeks away. He knew it. I knew it. The lie was a gift to both of us. It let me hang up without saying no. It let him tell my mother I had been too busy with school. That night, I went through the logic the way I went through a problem set. Grandma had a stroke. Grandma was home. Grandma had not asked for me in 6 years, except through my father's guilt delivery service. My father had been instructed to call. My answer had been a small lie that gave everyone an exit. I slept 8 hours for the first time in 3 months. Senior year, December. I moved off campus to a studio over a sandwich shop on Massachusetts Avenue, 3 subway stops from the lab. My rent was $840 a month. My stipend covered $700 of it. The lab covered the rest in exchange for 15 hours of weekly research assistantship. The frame was $14 at the CVS on Mass Ave. Black plastic, 8x10. I had carried the taped letter folded inside the cover of my organic chemistry textbook for 2.5 years. The folds were soft, the tape was browning. I unfolded it on the kitchen counter and smoothed the creases with the back of a spoon and slid it behind the glass and hung it on a nail above my desk. My roommate Maya came home at midnight. She made a cup of tea and looked at the frame for 30 seconds. "Why is it taped?" My mom tried to throw it away once. Once. Maya nodded and went to her room. I crossed the stage at Killian Court on a Friday in May. I had sent 4 invitations to Pottsville 3 months earlier. My mother's came back stamped return to sender. The envelope opened and resealed with a different brand of tape than the one she kept in the medicine cabinet. She had taken the time to send it back. She had not taken the time to write anything on it. My father's envelope was opened but not returned. Maddie told me later he had read it on the porch and put it in his work coverall pocket. My grandmother used hers as a coaster. The water ring was perfect, centered like she had done it on purpose. 3 seats in the family section stayed empty. Dr. Ortiz filled the first, my faculty advisor the second, Maya the third. Dr. Ortiz clapped for me by name when I crossed the stage, the only person in that row who clapped for any single graduate by name. After the ceremony, they took me out for Indian food, and we did not talk about who had not come. The package arrived on a Tuesday in July, 2 months after graduation. Brown cardboard, 12 by 10 by 8. The shipping label was hand-printed in pencil. The postmark was Pottsville. The return address line was blank. Inside was my grandmother's wooden recipe box. Oak. Davis carved across the lid. The varnish darker than I remembered. The hinge stiffer. I lifted the lid. The index cards were still there. there. Lasagna, pierogies, applesauce cake, Frank's chili, hot milk sponge cake, Polish white borscht, 53 cards in my grandmother's handwriting, 4 in my mother's. Under the cards, a cardboard insert lifted out. Under the insert, lying flat against the bottom of the box, was a yellowed manila envelope. I sat down on the floor. Inside the envelope, 3 items. The first was a high school transcript, class of 1991. The name on it was Linda Marie Walsh, my mother. Her GPA was 3.94, National Honor Society, senior class secretary, top 5%. The second was an acceptance letter from Lehigh Carbon Community College, registered nurse program, fall semester 1991, partial scholarship. The letter was dated April 3, 1991. The third was the same acceptance letter in 2 pieces, taped back together with brittle yellowed masking tape. The tape had cracked along the spine. The 2 pieces were still attached, but barely. My mother had taped her own scholarship letter back together. In 1991, she had kept it for 33 years. Hidden at the bottom of the oak recipe box she carried out of her mother's house when my grandmother died. The roll of Scotch tape in our medicine cabinet, the one I had used at 1:40 in the morning 7 years ago, that roll had been hers first. She had taught me to mend things without ever telling me what she had mended. I sat with the 3 pieces of paper on my kitchen counter for 2 hours. I did not cry. I do not remember thinking in sentences. I remember the kettle was on and I forgot about it, and Maya turned it off when she came in around 8. Maya looked at the papers. She did not ask. She made tea for both of us and sat across from me. I worked the math out. My mother had been 18 in 1991. Same GPA I had. Applied to nursing school on her own. Someone had torn her letter. My grandmother. Almost certainly. My mother had taped it back together with masking tape and hidden it at the bottom of the recipe box she would inherit when my grandmother died. She had stayed. She had married my father in 1992. She had spent 25 years cooking from the cards above her own buried letter. And then, when I was 18, she had torn mine. I understood the math. I did not forgive it. The understanding and the forgiveness are not the same thing. She had the tape in her hand and she chose to repeat it. There was also a photograph. My mother at 18 standing on the porch of Lehigh Carbon Community College in nursing scrubs, holding a brochure, smiling. I had never seen her smile that way in any photograph in our family albums. It was the smile of a person who had not yet learned to stop wanting. 33 years between her tape and mine. The same brand of tape because she had bought it. The lab spun out a company in my second year of doctoral work. We made mass spectrometry sensors for hospital clinical labs, faster detection of bloodstream infections, 16 hours instead of 72. I was one of 5 graduate students named on the patent. My founder equity grant was 2.4% of the company, vesting over 4 years with a 1-year cliff. The cliff vested on a Tuesday in March of my 6th year at MIT. My vested shares on paper were worth $750,000. I told nobody in Pottsville. The night of the cliff, I wrote one email to Maddie at her old Yahoo address. The subject was, "Hi." The body was, "Doing okay. Hope you are." Maddie replied at 4 in the morning. She must have had notifications on her phone with the sound on. The reply was, "Haley just turned 5. She's smart, T. Like you smart." I hadn't known Maddie's older child's name. I had not known her age. I learned both in one sentence. Over the next 8 months, Maddie sent 16 pictures to a folder I labeled M on my desktop. I replied to 1 or 2 with a single emoji. I did not yet know what I was going to do with the $750,000 on paper, or the second $750,000 still unvested. I knew I had time. I knew Haley was 5. The next eldest daughter conversation in our family was approximately 12 years away, or so I thought. The call from my father came 2 years and 3 months later, October. I was in the lab running a calibration on a new detector. My phone vibrated on the bench. Pennsylvania area code, Teresa, Dad, Grandma's 80th is in 6 weeks. They want you there. I sat on the lab stool and waited. Because they're starting on Haley, he said. I closed the laptop on the calibration. He explained it carefully, the way he explained things he had thought about for a long time before calling. Aunt Carol had bought Haley a play kitchen for her birthday, a big one, pink and white with little knobs that clicked. My mother had been nodding along with Carol's comments. She's so nurturing. She's so good at keeping house. She's going to be such a wonderful homemaker. Tim, Maddie's husband, was already using the phrase when she's old enough to help out around here. My sister, according to my father, was not saying no. She's 5, I said. She's 5, he agreed. I picked up a pen from the bench and wrote on the back of my hand, 6 weeks, Haley, birthday. Then I said, "Why are you calling Dad?" "Because they started on you when you were 5 too." And I didn't call anyone. I drove home after that and I sat at my kitchen table and I wrote a list on a yellow legal pad the way I wrote any list in the lab. Numbered, columned, what I wanted, what I was willing to do, what I was not willing to do, who the audience was, when, where, what the instrument would be. The instrument was money. Specifically, it was a trust. Funded and notarized before I set foot back in Pennsylvania, so that when I put the document on the table, it was not a promise. It was already real. I called Sarah Klein the next morning, office on Boylston Street. I told her what I wanted. The corpus was $250,000. Equity, liquidated from my vested shares. The terms were simple. Any female or male descendant of my grandmother, accepted into any accredited college, university, or trade program in the United States or Canada. 2-year, 4-year certificate program. Did not matter. Haley's name was on it. My nephew Cody's too. Sarah asked me twice if I wanted to add a note for the family. I said no both times. She accepted that without asking a third time. The document was the note. The instrument named the Davis Daughters Education Trust, with a footnote clarifying it covered all descendants regardless of gender. I kept the daughters in the title on purpose. $250,000. Notarized in 11 days. I picked up the signed and sealed sealed envelope from Sarah's office on a Wednesday and put it in a brown leather briefcase and booked a flight to Philadelphia. My grandmother's 80th birthday party was on a Saturday in November. I drove west from Philadelphia International through gray Pennsylvania morning light, the kind that doesn't change no matter what year it is. Brick row houses on every street. Dollar General on Center Street. 2 empty storefronts where a bakery and a hardware store used to be. I drove past the Greyhound station. The cinder block waiting room was still attached to a gas pump. The pump had been updated to a touchscreen model. I drove past my high school. The marquee read Go Tide. I drove past the Goodwill. In the window was a kitchen apron, green and yellow print, folded over a hanger, the same length and hem as the aprons my mother had worn every Saturday morning of my childhood. I did not stop. I drove past at the speed limit and turned onto Mahantongo Street and parked across from the Davis house at 1043. The mailbox had been repainted blue. The porch was the same. 4 steps. Iron railing on the left side. The hydrangea my mother had planted in 2001 was still there. Cut back for November. The canes bare. The front window curtain was the same curtain it had always been. I sat in the rental and counted to 100. Then I did it again. Cars began arriving at 11:15. Aunt Carol in the cream-colored Buick LeSabre, Donnie driving, Carol getting out first and glancing across the street at the rental without quite looking at it. Maddie at 11:22, green Subaru Outback, lifting Cody out of the back on her hip with the efficiency of someone who had not had a free hand in 3 years. Tim, her husband, lifting Haley out the other side. Haley was wearing a pink dress and white tights and a small navy cardigan. She held a plastic bay horse in her left hand. I watched my niece walk up the porch steps and through the front door of a house I had not entered in 7 years. She had never met me. She would not know who I was. To her, I was a name that had probably not come up much, because names that leave tend to get smaller over time until they are just a shape in the air that no one bothers to define. At 11:53, Maddie crossed the street. She came straight to the driver's window. She had taken off her coat. I rolled it down. She said, "I sent you the box." I said, "I know." She said, "It took me 5 years to find it. She had it in the attic." I said, "Thank you." Then she said, "Are you going to make a scene?" I said, "No, I'm going to make an option." She looked at me for 2 full seconds, which was the longest she had looked at me since we were teenagers. Then she nodded once and walked back across the street. I walked in at 12:08. 30 people in that living room. Folding chairs along the walls, plastic tablecloths in cream and gold, a cake on the dining table that read Happy 80th Graham in yellow piping, a second cake on the counter, lemon, smaller, the recipe box in the same spot it had always been, my grandmother in her green corduroy armchair, Aunt Carol at the dining table with Donnie, 3 cousins from my father's side near the window, 2 Walsh cousins, my mother's family, by the couch, Mrs. Hardesty and Mrs. Vargas from the church, both in their good coats, my dad in the kitchen doorway with a coffee cup he was not drinking from, my mother in the kitchen, dish towel in her hands. She saw me when I came through the door. Her face did not change. She turned and said something low to my dad. He stepped aside to let her pass, and she came into the living room, and the room adjusted around her arrival the way rooms adjust around a person who is used to being attended to. Conversation dimmed. Then it came back. My grandmother looked up over her reading glasses. She had gotten reading glasses since I last saw her. The frames were the same tortoiseshell she had always worn, but the lenses were new. And she said, "Teresa, you look thin." I said, "Hi, Grandma?" My mother said from 3 feet away in a voice calibrated to carry only as far as me, "Whatever you're thinking, don't." I said, "I'm not going to fight with you." She said, "Then what are you going to do?" I said, "Talk to Haley." Her left hand went to her hip. The dish towel was still in her right. She said, "She's 5, Teresa." I said, "I know." I went and sat in the folding chair nearest the front window and put the briefcase on the carpet beside my left foot and waited. The room remembered how to talk again in about 30 seconds. Mrs. Hardesty asked Mrs. Vargas about coffee. Tim and Donnie started talking about a section of Route 61 that was being repaved. Maddie settled on the carpet next to Haley and Cody. My grandmother went back to her reading. At 12:31, my mother picked up a butter knife and tapped it against the rim of a water glass. The room came down to a hush. My dad set his coffee cup on the kitchen counter. Maddie put Cody on the carpet next to Haley. Mrs. Hardesty and Mrs. Vargas turned their chairs. My grandmother stood up. The cane took her weight on her left side, and she held the back of the armchair with her right. She looked older than she had at 80, which was not a surprise, but was still a small shock to see. The way age looks different when you have not been watching it accumulate. She said, "Thank you all for coming. 80 years. She paused, and there was a gentle laugh from Mrs. Vargas and a clap from Donnie. She said, "I want to say something about our family." She looked down at Haley, who had set the bay horse on the coffee table and was watching her great-grandmother with complete attention, the way small children watch people who command rooms. "Davis women stay close. We don't chase, we don't drift, we don't get above ourselves. My Linda stayed, my Carol stayed, my Maddie stayed." She paused. She looked at Haley again. "And one day soon, my Haley will stay too." She lifted her water glass. "To staying." 28 glasses went up. 28 voices said it. My glass stayed on the side table beside my chair. My hand was on the armrest, not on the glass. I was watching Maddie. Maddie had picked up her glass. She had brought it to chest height. She had held it there, at the level of her sternum. Not raised, not lowered. She had not said the words. She had sat for 4 seconds with the glass at her sternum, and then she had set it back down on the carpet next to her knee. My mother did not see Maddie's glass. She was looking at mine. My mother crossed the room after the applause. She came to within 2 feet of my chair and kept her voice below the conversation level of the room. She said, "Don't." I said, "I'm not arguing with you." She said, "You will not do whatever you're planning to do today. This is your grandmother's birthday." I said, "I know what day it is." She said, "Teresa." I said, "I'm going to put something in front of Haley, and then I'm going to leave." leave. You can do whatever you want after I'm gone. She said, this is my mother's house. I said, it's Grandma's house. She had no answer for that. She turned on her heel and walked back into the kitchen archway and stood there with the dish towel twisted between both hands. I picked up the briefcase. I stood. I crossed the carpet to where Haley was sitting. Haley had the bay horse in her left hand again. She had retrieved it from the coffee table after the toast. She was walking it along the edge of the carpet with complete focus, making small sounds with her mouth. The horse's story apparent to her and invisible to everyone else in the room. The story was hers. She was 5. I knelt on one knee. She looked up. She had her mother's eyes. She did not know me. There was no recognition, no stored memory to match my face against. I was just a person who had come from across the room to kneel in front of her, which in Haley's experience was probably something adults did when they wanted to talk to her directly. She waited to find out what I wanted. Hi, Haley. I'm your Aunt Teresa. She considered this. Then she said, okay, and went back to the horse. I opened the briefcase on the carpet between us. I took out the taped MIT letter. I unfolded it along the original thirds, creases soft, the paper slightly warm from being in the briefcase against the heat of the room. The tape was visibly brown across the scholarship sentence. The scholarship sentence was still legible. I laid it on the carpet. I told her it was from when I was 18. I told her it was a letter saying someone had picked me. I told her that sometimes people try to take those letters away from you, but a letter saying someone picked you does not stop being true just because someone tears it up. I told her that when it was her turn, when she was old enough to want to go somewhere and learn something, and the letter saying yes came in the mail, there would be money waiting. I told her it did not matter what kind of school, or where, or how far away. The money would be there. She had been listening with the partial attention of a 5-year-old, which was the kind of attention that looks distracted, but retains more than you expect. When I stopped talking, she looked at the letter on the carpet for a moment, and then she picked it up and turned it over and looked at the back. Then she held it out to me. I said, you can keep that one. She looked at it again. She held it against her chest the way Maddie had held it later, though Haley's was an unconscious gesture, just a thing to hold on to while she thought about something. I stood up. I walked 4 steps to the coffee table and set the cream-colored envelope from Sarah Klein's office next to my grandmother's birthday cake. I said, there's $250,000 in here. It's in a trust for any girl in this family who gets into any school or any boy. Haley's name is in it. So is Cody's. The room had been paying partial attention from the moment I knelt on the carpet. Now the partial became whole. Chairs shifted, conversations stopped. Mrs. Hardesty set down her coffee cup. Aunt Carol stood up. You cannot do this here. I said, I did it 3 weeks ago. I'm just telling you now. My grandmother rose from the armchair. She used the cane and the armrest and the particular slow steadiness of a woman who has learned that getting up takes intention. She stood at her full height, which had compressed over the years but was still a presence in a room. She said, Teresa Marie Davis, the eldest daughter, stays. Always has. Always will. I looked at my mother, not at my grandmother, not at Aunt Carol, not at the 28 faces arranged around the room. At my mother, in the kitchen archway, with the dish towel in her hands. She said, this is not who we are. She said it quietly. The same volume she had used 7 years ago at the dining table. The same complete calm, no theatrics, no raised voice, just the fact of it, delivered as a fact, the way you read coordinates from a map. I said it back to her exactly as she had said it. Same volume, same tempo, same absence of everything except the words. Then I'm not who we are. The room went still. Not the quiet of a room waiting for what comes next. The quiet of a room that has just heard something it will be trying to process for a long time. Haley picked up a letter from the carpet. She looked at it. She held it up to her mother. Maddie, still on the carpet next to Cody, reached up and took it. She held it in both hands. She pressed it against her chest. She did not give it back. I picked up the briefcase. The trust document was on the coffee table. The photograph of my mother at 18, Linda Walsh, not yet Linda Davis, standing on the porch of Lehigh Carbon Community College in nursing scrubs with the smile she had never been able to get back, was in the briefcase. I had decided at the last moment not to put it on the table. Some things are for the person who earned them, not for the room. I walked to the door. I put my hand on the knob. I turned to my mother. I said, I taped mine too, Mom. Same brand of tape. I opened the door and walked out. From the porch, I could hear my mother's voice rising behind me. The kind of loud she almost never reached. The kind that meant something had been held a very long time and had finally let go. I walked down the 4 steps without looking back. I crossed the street to the rental. I sat in the driver's seat and put the key in the ignition and did not turn it. A knock on the window. Maddie. She was holding the taped letter and the cream-colored envelope. Her coat was on. Her breath came out white in the cold air. I rolled the window down. She said, Haley wants to keep this. She held up the letter. I said, she can. She said, the trust. Is it real? I said, notarized. Sarah Klein, Boston. The numbers are on the cover sheet. She said, Tim's going to be hard about it. I said, Tim doesn't have to sign anything. Haley is the beneficiary. You're the custodial parent. He's not on the paperwork. She breathed out. White air in November. She looked at the cream-colored envelope and then at the letter and then at me. She said, are you coming back? I said, I don't know yet. She said, okay. She did not say anything else. She walked back across the street and went inside and the door closed behind her. I turned the key. The engine started. The third call from my father came 3 months later. A Wednesday in February, 6:40 in the evening. I was at my kitchen counter in Cambridge cutting onions. He said, Haley just started a Saturday science program at Lehigh Carbon Community College. STEM camp for elementary kids, 6 Saturdays, 5 hours each. Maddie drove her to the first one this morning. I stopped cutting. He said, Maddie used the trust to register her. I said, good. He said, Tim said it was Maddie's money to spend. Maddie said it was Haley's. There was a long pause. He said, your mother knows. She won't say anything about it, but she knows. I said, okay. He said, I should have called called sooner. 7 years sooner. I said, yes. Another pause. He said, Haley wants to write you. Can Maddie send your address? I said, yes. He said, all right. He waited. I didn't say anything else. He hung up. I went back to the onions. I finished the dicing. I sauteed them with garlic and olive oil. I made pasta. I ate at the counter standing up. Lehigh Carbon Community College was the school that had sent my mother her letter in 1991. Haley was starting there at 5 years old. The geometry of it sat with me for a long time. The envelope from Pottsville arrived 3 weeks after my father's call. Pink paper, Maddie's handwriting on the front, the return address in Haley's kindergarten print. All caps. Backwards Y. Inside, 2 pieces of paper and 1 drawing. The drawing first, a red brick building, 3 stories, 6 windows. Across the top, in red crayon, 1 word. Haley. The first piece of paper was a letter. 6 lines in pink and red crayon. Dear Aunt Teresa, Mom said you went to MIT. I am drawing a building. The building has my name on it. I am 5. Love, Haley. The second piece of paper was the original taped MIT letter, the one I had laid on the carpet in front of her. The tape still browning, the fold still soft. On the back of the bottom third, a yellow post-it in adult handwriting that I knew was Maddie's, but dictated by Haley. It said, I'm done with this one. I'll write my own. I took the drawing off the envelope and put it on the refrigerator. I took the letter and put it back in the frame and hung the frame above my desk. The tape was still browning. The scholarship sentence was still legible. The people who tell you who you are will tell you for as long as you let them. The only way to answer is to be someone else. Quietly, without arguing, until they have to look at you and decide whether to look away or look up. My mother is still deciding. Haley is not waiting for her. Neither am I.